If you practice leaps, by the way, you know the best place to start practicing leaps? With your spouse.
You need a shot timer because that which gets measured gets worked on. The Range Tech Timer is the official timer of active self-protection because it is versatile, reliable, feature-rich, and very economical. Check out all it can do at the link below.
Any time of the day, really. Imagine, you know, your wife or your husband, if you just spent time listening to them, empathizing with what's going on in their world, asking them questions and drawing them out, showing that you understand what's going on and seeing how you can work together, would your marriage probably get better? It would.
My wife would say the else. Do that at least once a month.
Well, we ought to do that as often as we can. Okay? Now, let's talk briefly about our medical plan. We really got to make sure that we've got a solid medical plan. And that medical plan needs to include the things that are likely to happen as well as the traumatic stuff, right? High likelihood of an eventual medical emergency on your campus during a midweek event, during the worship service. I mean, you know, old people love to go to church, right? Chances that somebody's going to have a cardiac event. Chances that somebody's going to have a cranial event. Somebody has a stroke in the midst, chokes, stuff like that. You know, I don't know about y'all, but my Baptist church, we like potluck. Potluck means somebody going to choke on a chicken bone, right? So having some plan in place for that, really, really important. And as always, same thing as with your guns, training is more important than equipment. Yes. Training is more important than equipment. I see people that they're like, we bought an AED, and we bought this big med kit, and we're safe. I go, do you know how to use any of this stuff in there? Have you unbagged any of it? All your tourniquets in bags there won't help you in the cellophane. You don't know how to use it. You don't know how to stage it. You've never taken any training with it. It's useless to you. So if you get the opportunity here, you know, Brian McLaughlin is teaching trauma medicine here for free. And that dude has legit, no joke, combat saves as a doc. Multiple legit combat saves. And some thorny stories. Chris Seipert here. Multiple confirmed combat saves. You give Chris Seipert a pound of fresh ground beef, there's still hope. Special Forces doc. Tier 1. Like tier 1, tier 1. And you know, people are like, what, real tier 1? There's no such thing as fake tier 1. Right? It's just not. He's a ranger. Okay? And a Green Beret, even more. So training is more important than equipment. But that said, buy good equipment. AEDs save lives. There's no reason not to have one. You can get a reasonable AED on Amazon for like $250. There's no reason not to have 5 of them if you've got that much facility.
They're a little more than that.
No, you can get them up to about 600, but you can find them as low as about 250 for reasonable ones. And wait, you know, sometimes you wait for sales or stuff like that. Of course, you know, I really suggest Mountain Man Medical, one of our sponsors, Brian McLaughlin, and Riley Bowman is part owner of that company too, and good equipment that they vet. They don't sell crap. If it's on their website, it is not garbage. And they're serious about that. So many places, they'll sell the garbage too. Yeah, low information people, we'll sell them rats, tourniquets. You won't find it there. I get it, but they say it for what it is. They will say, this is not a good tourniquet. Okay? Now again, boo-boo kits are cheap. Do you need a boo-boo kit at church?
Yes.
Yeah, you're going to get plenty of boo-boos. People are going to get cuts. Yeah, you're going to use a whole bunch of that stuff and having a plan in place. So at your church, you know, we talk about, well, who's armed or whatever. Who's medically trained? Who's on med training today? You know, who's on med problems? So when we are out here at the range, we have a plan in place all the time. If we have a major event and something is going wrong, who takes charge of the actual care of the patient? Who takes charge of the scene? Who makes the call to 911? Who decides if we're going to transport them to the hospital or call an ambulance? All those things in place, when they're in place beforehand, makes your decision making easy and lets you be effective and make the plan happen rather than figure out a plan. Now, of course, you go, well, John, you're not telling me what to make the plan. I can't. I don't know the size of your congregation. I don't know your facilities, and I don't know your resources. So buy good equipment, train with that equipment, and yes, that includes, I mean, I really think anybody working with your children should have CPR training every year. It's easy, man. And I think adults too, right? Like, so why don't you have Red Cross CPR training? I mean, every year. That's just cheap insurance. So that kind of thing is very important, all right? And of course, your active killer response must include some serious trauma medical equipment. Now, how do I minimize my need for trauma medical equipment in an active killer event?
Don't get shot.
Kill that fucker fast. And I'm not joking. Faster you kill him, the less medical equipment you'll need. If you get Sutherland Springs and nobody's there to help, and out of 54 people at worship that day, 46 of them were either killed or seriously wounded. There is not a medical kit on earth that's going to handle that kind of problem. It just doesn't exist. Nobody left that church unscathed that day, and that is no longer a church. That facility is now a museum to those people. But the West Freeway Church of Christ goes on. Why? Because Jack was there that day, and yes, 2 people died, but the people realized, no, we're still safe. That this didn't end us because he ended it.
Sutherland Springs still exists as a church?
No, Sutherland Springs Church closed. They absolutely closed. The pastor planted or has taken over as a pastor of a different church down the road. But Sutherland Springs Church closed. I heard him say it at the Faith-Based Security Network. Church doesn't exist anymore.
Just recently?
It was last year.
Yeah, I was there last year. Okay.
It doesn't exist anymore. So, and again, I mean, over half the congregation died in a tragic event. So having that medical plan, serious trauma, I will say the one thing one of the things about the West Freeway Church of Christ shooting is they didn't have a medical plan or they didn't enact a medical plan. When you got 2 people with major sucking chest wounds and everyone's going, what do we do? Well, no, wait a minute. Somebody needs to start triage and care on those people. Now, I'm not saying there was necessarily anything that could have been done in those cases. Shotguns are devastating tools, but nobody did anything while those guys were dying. And once that murderer was down, having somebody that goes, no, I got medical trauma right now. I needed to get a plan in place. I know there's about to be 5,000 cops here, and I'm scene command to make sure that this goes okay, that they get in here, and that the ambulance is able to get in here for the good people. Whoa. So we'll talk about active killer plan in just a little bit. I know we're almost out of time, but I want to get through some of this stuff. All right. This is the part of the presentation that's brand new. This is the new version of the presentation. We have to talk about clergy sexual misconduct. Okay? I'm going to tell you, as a church safety, you are morally and spiritually obligated to protect your congregation from sexual abuse by your clergy. And yes, that means you are responsible to stand between your pastor and your congregation. And that's a hard thing to say because people go, wait a minute, we trust our pastor, we love our pastor would never do that. That's exactly what James McDonald's congregation thought. It's exactly what Bill Hybels' congregation thought. It's exactly what everybody at Ravi Zacharias Ministries thought. It's what everybody at Hillsong thought, that Carl Lentz was a great guy and everything was fine until he's sexually abusing his congregation. The list goes on and on and on and on and on. And you go, well, wait a minute, not our pastor. Come on, guys. It's common enough now that when you're in a position of authority, just be very clear that spiritual authority especially builds trust and builds this man of God theology that we're only here because this guy's particularly talented. And so we have to protect him at all costs because he's the reason we're successful, and we will let him get away with doing things that we know are wrong. Like we knew that James McDonald had a 16, 18-year-old female assistant that at like Promise Keepers rallies and shit that would sit on his lap doing stuff. And people watched that happen and nobody said anything. A 45-year-old man with an 18-year-old assistant sitting on his lap doing stuff, and you go, that's a huge red flag. Wait a minute, that is not okay. Now, I'm all about, I don't mind as a man today being alone with a woman who's not my wife, okay? Women are not that powerful. I own my sexuality. They don't own my sexuality. They can't do that for me. I'm responsible before God to be a man of sexual integrity. However, in any kind of authority-based relationship, I'm not protecting me from her. I'm protecting her from me. And undue influence. So again, 3% of women who attend church reported having been subject to clergy sexual misconduct. That's not to say sexual misconduct in general. That number is ridiculously higher. It's about 50%. Okay? About 50% of women report being the victim of sexual misconduct. But of clergy sexual misconduct, about 3% of women in your church. So let's just say you have 200 people at your church, 100 of them are women. There are 3 women in your congregation on average who have experienced sexual abuse at the hands of their clergy. So our congregation should know, listen, we want everybody to understand, Pastor Jim is our pastor, and Pastor Jim should never at any point have any kind of a romantic relationship with anybody in the congregation, because Pastor Jim is in a position of spiritual authority in our congregation. Whether or not we want to admit he is in a position of spiritual authority, and therefore any kind of romantic interest from any clergy member is an abuse of power, because there's no consent among when we have powered relationships. This is the same reason, you guys know, like if you work a regular job, right? And you realize among reporting relationship people, you cannot have a romantic relationship. Because when you do, you don't have consent. And when you don't, I mean, so you think about this in the military, right? Where you get chief asks out a E4. And you're like, way to get fired, chief. Because there's no consent there. There's a power relationship. Which is why, seriously, at Active Self-Protection, Stephanie Widener is the CEO. The only employee that doesn't answer to her is Neil. They're not in a reporting relationship. Neil's my only employee that actually answers to me. Answers to me. Tells me how to run my life, more like it.